There was no flight to get there that night from here to Connecticut. I flew out the first flight the next morning. And by the time I landed, he passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, bro.
Okay?
I'm
And
so
think
sorry to hear
about the
that.
guilt when I walked into the hospital and I saw him laying on that bed and I cried like a baby. And you know what I was saying? I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry. Right? And nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody. We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
We are coming to you live from the new BEP studio for another thought-provoking episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, Tony Tidbit. So before we get into our new topic today, I want to give a friendly reminder to everyone to please check out our partners at codemmagazine.com, whose mission is saving the Black family by first saving the Black man. Check them out at codemmagazine.com. That is codemmagazine.com. 2 M's. Definitely check them out because they're awesome. And then you want to check out what we're going to do and talk about today. So we have the president of Code M Magazine, who's going to appear today on the Black Executive Perspective podcast to dissect his compelling article, Surviving the Loss of a Living Child. We will explore the emotional landscape faced by parents estranged from their adult children, delving into the causes, consequences, and coping strategies for such complex family dynamics. So the president of Code M Magazine, Brad Bolden, welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, my brother.
Thank you, Tony. And I want to say congratulations on your 1 year anniversary. I want to say congratulations on creating your own studio. It looks fantastic, brother. So congratulations to you and your team.
Well, look, buddy, thank you, man. But more importantly, thank you and your partnership. I mean, how should I say, we came together at the seams about 4 or 5 months ago. And since that time frame, buddy, we've seen both of our platforms really thrive. I mean, look, let's be fair. Code and Magazine has been doing great things for a number of years. You guys are, known as the new Ebony, the new Essence. You guys are taking it to the next level, especially as we talked about earlier. Your mission is saving the Black family by first saving the Black man. So we're very excited to partner with you guys because obviously we're both, our missions are the same, where we're both trying to share stories, we're both trying to educate, and more importantly, we're trying to uplift our communities. So I really thank
Yeah.
you and appreciate your partnership, my brother.
Absolutely, bro.
And
Absolutely.
here, and
Appreciate it.
that's why we have you on today, my man. The article that you wrote, and listen, as being a subscriber to Coda Magazine, you have some very hard hitting articles. And then you have articles and topics about mental health and fitness and, hey, do you want how to date a boss babe? And now you're delving into stuff that typically, we don't really talk about a lot, right? The loss of a living child. So, are you ready to talk about this, my brother?
Let's go.
All right, man. So I want to dive into it because, when I read the article and you and I talked about, coming on, I want you to come on to discuss it. It really hit home with me, but some of the statistics and stuff that you articulate in the article was mind blowing, right? So we're definitely going to get into all those things.
Right.
But the first question I want to ask you, my brother, is why did you write this article?
So, Black people across the country and around the world, we have the same lives as everybody else. And one of the things that's happening is I'm starting to notice how many parents are struggling with their adult children, teenage children, college age children, where communication is broken, the relationship's been severed. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about it because so many people that I know have fractured relationships with their kids. And so we wanted to offer some insights into it and some solutions to connecting with your adult child if that relationship has been fractured.
Well, listen, number one, again, it's one of the things that we don't talk about. We
No.
hear it, or we have family members, or to be honest with you, we're a part of it, right? Where we haven't talked to our adult children. So I really thought this was great, and I'm looking forward to diving in further. But let me read an excerpt out of the article because I thought it was a bunch of statistics that you put in there that I thought was like, wow. But here's the first thing that really took me. And I quote, many adult parents are grappling with the fact that their adult kids don't want to have anything to do with them. As the rate increased across the country, so did the fracture of the American family. So much so that there are scores and scores of broken relationships between parents and their adult children. And I want to ask you about the character that you have in the article, the guy named Stephen,
Right.
okay? And you talk about how Stephen got a divorce, second marriage. He's excited. He feels that he found his soulmate and they're going to get married. And then he invited his adult children to come to the wedding and they shun him and they don't want to have nothing to do with him.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
talk about that a little bit. And I love to know, is this, a real individual? Is this more of a fiction individual? Talk a little bit about Stephen.
Yeah. So, I was walking down the street one day on my afternoon walk, and I saw a neighbor of mine who lives about 6 houses down. And so, we get tickets to everything because we're a media company. And I offered him and his wife some tickets to a Guardians game. And I said, listen, if you want to take your kids or grandkids to a game, let me know. And he said, Brad, I hate to tell you this, but I don't have a relationship with my kids. And so he's the reason that I wrote the article. And so he's real. I left his last name out of it to protect him. And I did ask if I could share his story. And I did. I didn't interview him, but we had a discussion, and I pulled the quotes from the conversation that we had. And he said it was okay to kind of lead with his story, but it resonated with me so much, man, because I have adult kids. I have a 25, 23, 20, and 19. And so, he's not the first person where I've had this conversation where the relationship is fractured or even non-existent. So based on that, I wrote the article, I did some research. And then through research, I found out there are so many more people who have fractured relationships with their adult children.
Buddy, flat out. I mean, well, number one, thanks for sharing that. And
Yes, sir.
I imagine that it was somebody real, right? Here's the thing though, a couple things. So divorce rate, which United States, 47, 48, 50% divorce rate.
Yes.
When we think of divorce, we do think about the children. We think about how the family now is fractured, but we really think about it, and at least from my perspective, I think about it with young kids,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've never really thought about it with adult children, right? Because at the end of the day, you figure, and again, everybody's situation is different. So you think that when you think of divorce, you think most people get divorced, first 7, 8, 9, 10 years, right?
Right.
And then they have kids and their kids are young. Okay. In this situation with Steven, and again, it doesn't say, but he got a divorce. Evidently the marriage was horrible. And again, this I'm going by based on what I'm reading in the article,
Correct.
right?
Right.
And then he remarries, and then the kids don't want to have anything to do with them. So the thing is, I hate to say this, and I don't want to make it there's several people I know in my family or as friends of mine that deal with this exact same thing. Okay. And so, one of the things that you talk about in the article is that not only the divorce rate is causing the issue, but it was something else when you said social media. So what do
Correct.
you mean by social media is also having an effect when it comes to this issue?
So I want you to, and I think we're kind of in the same age range, where I'm a Generation X. I think you're Generation X. So our parents were baby boomers, right? So they were born in an age where you didn't get divorced, whether you liked each other or didn't. You didn't separate. I think we're the first generation to have divorce in our lives, and the unfortunate uh, side effect of having social media also be an added factor in how our children behave and how they look at life today. So when I talk about social media, social media is also almost more detrimental than any other disease we can name. If you take a look at the addiction of social media and how often we look at our phones, have our phones in our pockets, scroll, they said that it's more addictive than drugs. And so if you the one correlation that I wanted to draw is the fact that you have high divorce rate, and then you have the internet raising our children, impacting their decision making, how they view life. So this is the first group of kids where they were born after the internet came out. They also are more isolated than ever. They're also smarter than ever, and so they tend to have their own opinions at a higher degree than we did when we were coming up. And so I think the consequence, because causality, cause and effect, you have adult children who are much more judgmental of their parents' decision making. And then they took a look at their own lives, and then they determine, whether right or wrong, what's best for them. And sometimes severing the relationship with a parent they feel like in their best interest. So I believe that, of course, divorce is a factor. Also, single households. We don't get together like we used to. When I was little, my family were my friends. But for my children, family is there, but they don't have an impact on their lives on a daily basis like my family did on mine. So there's several different factors, but social media is a huge factor because it just creates fractured lifestyles, isolation, a lack of a need for touch, intimacy with friendships, family, parents. And so, man, it causes a big problem for us.
Let me ask you this. So, and I didn't see it in the article, but I love just based on your research. So I got a couple of questions. Do you know the percentage of adult children across the country that don't talk to their living children that don't talk to their parents any longer? Or
So I looked for that data.
one member of
I
the family.
Yeah. I looked for that data. No one is keeping track of that. So I don't know if we're not studying it from a therapist relationship. I don't know why it's not being tracked, but I think it's something that we need to take a look at because it's a lot more prevalent in American society than we like to think.
Right. And then my other question, and again, using Stephen as an example, it was divorce, right?
Right.
What are some of the other reasons why living kids don't talk to their parents?
So, you have things from childhood trauma, molestation, uh, poor parenting, forcing your children to either do things that they didn't want to do, whether it's play a sport, piano, ballet. A lot of times we as parents, we force things on our children thinking that this is in their best interest and it's not. I've had examples, and ever since I wrote the article, I've had people coming up to me or texting me saying, "Hey, man, this article hit home because I'm dealing with the same thing." And so, whether your parents were alcoholics, whether they made good decisions, didn't make good decisions, some of those become a factor. And then, when the child grows up, once they figure out that the parent made bad decisions or the parent was neglectful, then this adult child will make a decision on their own to either penalize the parent, uh, promise themselves that they won't make the same mistake, or they will forgive the parent, right? So you have all three dynamics kind of at play there.
Yeah, I mean, so buddy, so number one, let's back up because abuse, I get.
Yeah,
Okay, I get that. Sexual abuse, totally get it.
right.
Verbal, negativity, I totally get it, right? Um, the divorce, okay, I can see that too, right? However, the thing about being a parent, as far as I know, there's no perfect parents, right? We've
Right.
all made mistakes in thinking that we're doing the right thing. And I'm not talking again the abuse part. I'm not getting into the divorce stuff, but I'm just saying some of the other things that you just got finished talking about, right? It seems like at any time, I got two daughters, and this story does hit home with me, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that later on.
Okay.
But I got two daughters who I think me and my wife do a really good job. And, look, we ain't perfect, but we bring them up. We try to raise them the right way. Obviously, there's times when they want to do stuff and we say no. There's been times when we wanted them to play a certain sport and then they decided that they didn't want to do it any longer. And, it was tough for us, but we said, okay, okay. But my point I'm trying to make is that just based on what you said, they can get to be 30, 31 years old and look back and says, they was terrible. And I
it's
don't want to
happening.
talk to them no more, right? That's basically where we at now.
Bro,
And some
it's
of these
happening.
issues, right?
It's happening. It's happening. So, let's talk about our children for a second,
Right.
if we can. Unfortunately, I think we were raised in an era where we looked at the totality of our parents. My father was he is an amazing man. My parents were amazing. We were raised very well. My father's not perfect. You're correct. But when I take a look at what he did for us, I could never have resentment towards my father. If you take a look at the kids that are being raised today, the kids are in my kids' generation, 25, 28, and below, down to 16, 17. They're a lot more judgmental of how they were raised than we were, And so it's a double-edged sword because, you wanted to give your kids the best. We kind of coddled and spoon fed them and gave them everything, lived in the best suburbs, went on vacation and all of that. But our kids are in that woke society where they don't trust CNN anymore. They don't trust Fox News. They get their information off the internet. They're overeducated to some degree, but they have no experience, right? And I get on my daughter about this all the time. I'm like, you're one of the smartest people that I know at 20, but you also have no experience. So you're making all your decisions based on education, but not a feeling, And so that component that's missing is the ability to have empathy, to have reverence, to have commonality, to have, the ability to view yourself from someone else's position, right? You and I have perspective because we can see ourselves in other people. We have empathy for our fellow human, but the children of today, because they're so isolated, they're overeducated and underexperienced.
Yeah, and so I hear that, and I'm not going to say I disagree, right? I think though, when it comes to kids, it's playing the long game because at the end of the day, the old biblical parable about the prodigal son, okay, where the
Right.
son goes with, the father rings him up, has an inheritance for him. He wants his money now. He's jealous. He doesn't, and then he runs away, right? And then he's gone for years. He's not talking to his father. Then he comes back, right, and says, "And what did the father say? My son is home." Okay, so I look. I've been in situations where I, had a rough outing with my mother. Okay, where there was a time frame that we didn't talk as much as we did before, right?
Right.
And it happens. And I don't. But my point is to what you just got finished saying about the empathy part, and that's why I talk about the long game. But then and it was more of an issue versus she was a horrible mother, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point I'm trying to make is, I think most people at some point bounce back and they look at the totality of their experience with their parents, right? And there was probably an issue, right? I'll tell you this story, this one story. So my daughter, you haven't met her yet. She lives in Michigan. And this was, I'm talking years ago. This was early 2000s, okay? And her and I didn't chat for a while because we just kind of, it was a falling out, okay? So we didn't talk for a while. And then my wife, Gail, we invited her to come to visit us for, I think it was Thanksgiving, Christmas, I can't remember, right? So she spent the week out here with us. We had a good time, right? I'm working in the city, so I got up early to take her to the airport so I can catch the train to come into the city to go to work. So I got up 3 in the morning, took her to the airport, gave her a big hug, loved her, said we had a great time. And then I got to the went home. I mean, went to the train station, took the train into the city. I got into the city, went into my office, turned my computer on. There was an email from her, and the email says, "Dad, I love you, and I'm sorry." and what we went through. You were right, and I was spoiled, but I just want to let you know how much I love you and how much you did the right thing, and I love the way you brought us up, brought it, blah 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 blah. And I cried like a baby.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Right.
because but you see my point here. Okay,
I do. I do.
and so my point is, and now we have a tight relationship. You see my point? So I hear you that, there's all the things that you talked about. I don't disagree, but I do think that at some point, and not everybody, there's an old saying: kids are like rubber bands, right? If they're going to stretch out, but if you brought them up the right way, at some point they'll bounce back.
I don't disagree with you. I think there are cycles to this, and I think there are situations where, and I put this in an article because we detailed the scenarios in which you are to engage, you are to release, you are to wait, and you're to be patient. And so there's cycles to this where, depending on the problem, uh, there's a different solution for each problem. So I agree with you, right? I have my 19-year-old is at Ohio State, 2 hours away, doesn't come home from college like he used to because he's so far away. And so I went to him. I was like, you know what? It's been 3 weeks. I haven't seen him. And when he used to come home, it was all good. But since he didn't, I went to him. And I think you have to stay connected to your kids and listen. It is still a 70-30 relationship. I know, and I preach this to my kids. Hey, you're 50% of the relationship. And so I need for you to call and check on me like I'll call and check on you. But the truth is that as the mature parent, it is always the onus is on you to protect the relationship as much as you can. Because, my father's 87 years old. And, John F. Kennedy Jr., he said, you're not grown until you lose both your parents. Okay. And so even though my dad is 87 and he's here and he's thriving and I still feel 20 when I see my dad. I still revert back to that 12-year-old kid when I'm in my father's presence.
It's time to rethink your protein. AgriLab's protein bars are crafted with high-quality protein, double the leucine, and enriched branched-chain amino acids, essential for optimal muscle recovery. Finally, a protein bar that works as hard as you do. So visit agrilabs.com and use the code BEP to get 20% off. That's agrilabs.com, promo code BEP.
And so it's really, really important that as a parent, you do your level best to maintain a healthy, positive relationship with your kids. Where I challenge you, though, Tony, is that our children are raised a little differently and their perspective is different. They don't need to own a home. They're not career oriented. They're not necessarily in a rush to drive, get married, recreate. So their perspective is different because their goals are different. And so because they look at life so differently than us, their decision making is skewed in my opinion as well. And I don't want to say skewed to make it sound negative that they're wrong, but I think that our children today they judge life a lot more harshly than we did. We tended to take a look at life and say, you know what, man, this too shall pass. And I think our children sometimes get stuck in a frame of mind or a way of thinking and cannot get beyond it. And so, we recommended therapy. We do have steps to engage a child if they're upset, but we also warn parents that they are not to be abused by an overbearing child who's demanding one thing or another. You have to protect your peace as well. And so there's a fine line between I want to repair this fractured relationship to I want to protect my peace.
So, buddy, go into more specifics in terms of the steps. So if somebody's listening to this right now, I gave an example, you gave an example about your son, right?
Right.
What's some of the things that they can be able to do where they're not going to run their child off, right? Or to your point, they're not going to, well, if he ain't going to say nothing, I ain't going to say nothing. You know what I'm saying? And what's some of the things that people could do?
So the typical fractured relationship on average lasts between 4 to 5 years. So we wanted to make that point clear because depending on where people were in the spectrum of where they were with their fractured child, we wanted to let them know what kind of time frame they had to work with to get this thing going. And so if you go beyond 5 years, the longer you wait, the harder it gets to repair it, Tony.
So hold on one second. Just stop for a second, because I just want to make sure I'm clear what I'm hearing. So it's 5 years. So for 5 years, a living child
Yes.
doesn't talk to their parents,
Well, they may not be
but the
completely silent.
relationship is fractured.
The relationship is fractured, right?
Okay.
So maybe, and I'll kind of go into it to symptoms where you're calling your kid or you're trying to talk to him, and the conversation is not as deep or detailed as it used to be. The phone calls become less and less and less, and there's a certain level of avoidance that your child has with you. Always busy. I'll call you back, but they don't. Blah blah blah. And so those are some of the first warning signs that there's a problem. If you do get to the crux of the situation where you do find out what's wrong, we also detail that you don't want to diminish how they feel. Whether you agree or disagree is not the point. You want to allow them to speak their truth and then internalize that information and then start to work from there. So half the battle is finding out what the real problem is. And then, okay, what do I do and how do I begin to repair that? So becoming defensive obviously does not work.
So can you speak on that? Because now I would imagine, and again, I've been in this situation before. We get defensive because we want to
Yeah.
immediately, explain whatever the situation happened, whatever happened in the situation. It ain't our fault, or you listen, or our communication was wrong. Blah 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 blah. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think 90% of the time, that's the response that people do.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, I'm not gonna say that I agree with getting defensive, but as a father of 4 children, the first thing I'm thinking of is, do you understand what I sacrificed
But you
and how
see my
much
point,
money,
though.
bro? You understand? I changed the
I know.
diapers. Yo, I taught y'all how to, I protected you at night. I kept the heat on, cheese in the refrigerator. I clothed you. We went on vacation. We did this. You had a perfect, amazing life from my perspective. And so, when you hear your children are frustrated with you, the first thing you want to do is, do you understand just how much I did for you and what kind of parent I was to pay for all the travel, sports, vacations, homes, cars? And so
But hold on
you
one
have
second.
to,
One of the steps is not to do that, though, right?
what I'm saying to you is
Yeah.
you have to put that stuff to the side.
Yeah.
Because in order to get to the crux of the situation, and more importantly, Tony, in order for them to be heard, you want to make sure that they feel heard. So you can't sit there and be defensive. You're going to have to park that to the side for a second and say, you know what? I got to hear them out so I can understand what they're saying to me and then internalize that. Because, everybody might be in the car, but not everybody's listening to the same music anymore.
No.
Right? Remember back in the day when we were going on vacation, it was one 8-track, one CD player in the car, and we all was listening. Now with your kids, they got headphones on.
They don't even listen to my music.
Wife might be asleep. You driving for 8 hours. And this is what life looks like now for the American family, though. Right?
Oh, man, that's
right.
This is true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Bro. I remember when I was little, and we were the first people on my street to get cable. The cable box was downstairs in the basement. We used to pop popcorn. We would get the space heater, go downstairs and watch Smokey and the Bandit as a family.
Hold on, get the space heater because there was no heat.
Yeah. But today, my 4 kids they're all in their room. I'm in the family room. Wife's in the kitchen. And so it's it's a reflection of American society today where we're not together, even in our own homes.
Let me ask you this, though, because, and I'm hearing you. I just want to make sure I'm clear here, right? And again, I know you said you looked for this research.
Yes, sir.
Based on the article that you wrote, I looked at it as a broad, fractured, living child who no longer talks to you. Is there any data that says this age group, it's a bigger splinter versus this age? So are there people that are 50, 55, 60 that's not talking or has a fractured relationship with their parents at a higher or similar rate than somebody who's 20, 25, 30?
No, there is no data to support or suggest, demographical evidence that 50-year-olds and 20-year-olds are any
The
different. What
reason I
I'll
bring
tell,
it up is because
uh
you're talking generational, right? And
yes,
we're
I
talking
am.
about how we were raised, right? So
Yes,
we
I am.
fall into that category versus
Right.
the younger, all the things that you talked about them. So I just wanted to see if there was some type of data in terms of the difference.
No, no, no. But I can also tell you that there are a lot of grandparents raising their grandchildren and frustrated with their adult children as well, right?
Mhm.
And so there are so many different factors as to what is going on. What I can tell you is that since the internet has become prevalent in American society, it's also correlated with the fracturing of the American family and the fabric of American life. And so, even though there's no data, concrete data to indicate where the problem is and how it is, we all know it exists. I can tell you right now, I'm getting phone calls, I'm getting emails, I'm having people stop me if they know who I am and say, bro, that article that you wrote, I'm dealing with that. I had somebody come up to me and say, bro, my daughter and I are in therapy right now because I got divorced. She blamed, she was mad at me. And listen, I don't want to say that children have fractured relationships more with their dads than their moms, because I can't find that data either. But a lot of men came up to me after their divorce and said they had some kind of problem with dealing with their child post divorce, with them either moving on, thinking that they're the blame, uh, because they're the leader in the house, supposedly. They're the man, and they're struggling with their adult child. And when I say adult children, I'm talking about 16, 17, up to
Right,
25, 28 years old.
right.
In Stephen's case, his children, when he got a divorce, decided they didn't like the fact that he remarried and he was happy. They removed themselves from his life and their children. So now
You can't
he
even deal
doesn't
with his
know this. Yeah,
grandkids.
he can't see his grandkids. He doesn't see his adult children. And what do you do with that when I'm living in the same community as my adult kids? I'm in a grocery store. I see them in aisle 23. I'm in aisle 13, and I can't even go hug them and see them. So, we all deal with death, but my God, what do you do when you have a child that's alive and you can't speak to them?
Yeah, how much, and again, I don't know, again, from a research standpoint, but I'm going to throw this question at you. How much, and I'm talking specifically divorce, okay? Let's just go to divorce.
Okay.
How much does the the spouse, the ex-spouse, have something to do with the children not wanting to talk to the other parent because for whatever reason they still hold, and I'm talking the parent, I'm talking the spouse
Yes.
part, the
Yes. Yes.
ex-spouse,
I
all right, that
understand.
they still, because a lot of times, man, people use their kids as weapons, okay, in divorce, all right, and then and just to have people on their side. So so, and let's be fair here too. And again, I'm not I'm not trying to be Dr. Phil, but the majority of people who get married shouldn't have got married. Okay, first of
Right.
all, right?
Right.
Even if they had kids, a lot of people aren't happy, right, in a relationship. They hang on to the relationship because they have kids. Okay, the kids see that they ain't happy. The kids see that somebody's miserable or they're fighting all the time. There's a million things that go on, right? And then when they break up, when somebody finally says, you know what, this ain't working, life is too short. You need to be happy. I need to be happy. And then they move on, then there's one spouse, it could be the husband or the wife. They fight over the kids, and then whoever gets the kids uses the kids against the ex-partner,
Right.
even though they know the relationship was horrible.
Right.
They knew it wasn't going to work out anyway, but they
Correct.
still use the kids as a weapon. And then the kids end up, to your point of the article, I don't want to talk to my father no more because
Right.
he's marrying somebody else and he left mama, and I block, even though the kid, and again, we know every situation is different, even though the kid knows that when they were together they was no good for each other. So I
Right.
just, let me hear your thoughts on that.
No, you're correct. And so, again, there's not hard evidence on the percentages of who uses or weaponizes the children, but we know it's happening.
Right.
We know it happens. And we know, to quote Dr. Phil, children would rather come from a broken home than be in a broken home. And so children even know that their parents, shouldn't be together. I've had umpteen times where people come up to me and they say, I told my parents, man, I couldn't wait for y'all to get a divorce because the house got happier, there was peace, and life got better as a result of parents getting a divorce. Now, even though that's the case, there is still a wanting for the traditional family where you have the patriarch, the matriarch, and the child. I think even your adult children long to have a two-parent household where there's love, there's peace, there's intimacy, there's the cookouts, there's the dinners. And a lot of times, in American society, and I fight this with my kids all the time, I need to see you. We need to get together. We need to spend some time together. I think absence makes things worse, almost like texting. I don't text negatively because there's so much lost in translation when you text people. So, if I'm talking to my kids and I can hear in their voice, we need some FaceTime, I'll go to their house and say, you know what, we're getting together. I don't even ask, right? Because asking implies they have a choice. And so I'm like, hey, I'm coming down to Ohio State. I'll see you 6:00.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so you got to make sure that you stay in your kid's face. You have to make sure that you check in. And I think that face-to-face time allows for empathy. It allows for compassion to be there. It allows for touch, right? You got to hug your children, even though they're adults. And like at my age, I have my own life now. All my children are in college or grown. And sometimes you can forget a little bit that, hey, I need to be checking in. But you have to, bro, because they're busy. They're out there fighting a hard life to become something, do something. And I think you got to stay plugged in. And so as a parent, I'm very fortunate where I don't have a fractured relationship, but I feel so bad for the people that do, because I don't know what I would do if I had an adult kid out here and I couldn't speak to him, or I couldn't go hug him, and I couldn't talk to him. So I wrote the article to make sure for the people who are struggling with this, that they have some solutions, that they're not alone. And unfortunately, it's not going to repair all the relationships, but hopefully it can have an impact on somebody.
Right. Let me ask you this, man. Going back to the prodigal son, the biblical parable. When the son came back, in the moral of the story, the father forgave him. Okay? So where does forgiveness fall in the place of this? Right? Because at some point, regardless of what happened or who started it, somebody's got to forgive somebody for this relationship to mend. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, listen, forgiveness is huge. But there has to be space. Space has to be created for it, Tony. So the mistake that many of parents tend to make is that they feel attacked unjustly by their children. And so instead of internalizing it, they make excuses. And I think that sometimes, life, when you have this kind of situation, you can have what's known as a Pyrrhic victory. And a Pyrrhic victory is when you win the battle, but you lose the war, right? So I can win this battle with my kid and I can defend myself and all of that. But then my child says, you know what? I heard your position. I just told you mine, and I'm done with you because you weren't listening. So we have to do a better job at listening as parents. We have to be apologetic. Someone has to cross the 50 line first. That 50-yard line is critical. And if my child was mad at me, bro, I'm crossing that line to come over there to figure out what's going on, because I didn't sacrifice everything that I sacrificed to not have a relationship with my adult children. I have a 20-month-old granddaughter, man, and she's precious. And, as a circle of life happens, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see your child have a child.
What can society, that old thing, that phrase that Hillary Clinton says, it takes a village, right?
It does.
What can society do to support families that have these fractured relationships?
So, I'll take my personal family and use that as an example. I was raised by my father, who was in my life, but I had 5, 6, 7 uncles who also were impactful. And they taught different things. One uncle was rich. One uncle was a farmer. One uncle was a police officer. My father is an engineer. So they all taught me different parts and walks of life that together created who I am today. And so I recommend that your children have more than you in their life, because let's just say, for instance, my child is mad at me. They have my brother who has an intimate relationship with my kids. They call each other. Their relationship is independent of me. My brother gives my children perspective about me. I have cousins who communicate with my kids where, they keep in touch with my kids, and we do this for each other to make sure that we stay plugged in to the family and the kids, because it takes a village, Tony. It takes a village, and that rings true today. I think that unfortunately we have to be way more attentive with it. I think my parents didn't struggle with it. Every weekend my parents were getting together playing cards with all the aunts and uncles, and we would switch houses, and it was just a foregone conclusion you was going to be with family this weekend.
Right.
But
right.
now we got to build in time. Hey, 3 months from now we're going to get together, and we still only have half the people show up. You know what I'm saying?
So,
So, bro, we have got to find a way to put the phones down, reconnect with family, get back to getting in the backyard, cooking out, have conversation, make the kids hang out. We got to get back to touching each other, because I'm going to tell you, the internet's not going anywhere. Social media is not going anywhere. If anything, social media is getting worse. You got the TikToks, 7-second videos, where now, I can't even sit through an hour and a half movie without being bored out of my mind, because the framing is slow. The plots are horrible, because they're trying to keep your attention. Right? So guess what's happening to your kids who born in that? They were born in that. Remember? They were born into video games. Right? So they're hitting L1, L2, L7, X, 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 X. They're not paying attention to what's going on right now. Right. And I'm going to tell you, let me just add this. We spend a lot of time planning for the future, right? But we don't spend any time living in the moment. We've got to go back to living in a moment as a society. And I would encourage any parent, create in the moment situations with your kids.
Absolutely, buddy. And I want to back up, because you said something. I don't want to make sure our audience missed this. And going back to that, it takes a village. And you said, hey, it's important that their uncles and their cousins and everybody's plugged in. Yeah. Why is that? I call that preventive maintenance, right? Because what happens is, if there's an issue that comes up, and if everybody in the family has a tight relationship with everyone, somebody in the family, that person may not come to their mother or father and talk about that issue, but they'll go to Uncle Brad. They'll go to cousin Joe. They'll go to cousin Irene. They'll go to Aunt, Kathy, and because they'll have a special relationship with those other individuals, and then they'll share that situation, and then that gives time for somebody in the family to make sure that this doesn't turn into a horrible situation, and provide more perspective. Listen to whatever the issue is, maybe even go back and tell the parent, or whatever the case may be. I'm just saying it still can go awry, right? But my point is, by having that support mechanism is very important, right? Because nobody just one day wakes up and says, I'm done. They're talking to somebody, hopefully in their family. There's somebody that they're really close with. And look, we know this as parents. Once our kids get to a certain age, they stop listening to us. But they will listen. We all have had the situation where I tell my daughters to do blah, 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 and and then Uncle Joe will say the same stuff. They're like, wow, that's awesome. Thank you. I never heard it before, right? But you need Uncle Joe for that. You need Auntie Carol for that. You need Grandma for that, right? Because then they can hopefully talk to them and make sure that this situation doesn't become combustible and then go off and explode. And next thing you know, you got a child's not talking to their parents for 5, 6, 7 years. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And also, I think we need to be more cognizant of the symptoms and be.
That's my point.
Exactly. We need to pay attention to when the cycle starts. And we detailed that in the article. Pay attention, because don't wait until they're not speaking. Pay attention to the symptoms. The reduced conversations. Conversations not as deep as they used to be.
Exactly.
You need to be check in on your kids as often as you can without being irritating. I remember when my kids first went to college, and I became an empty nester, And 3-4 days would go by, and I was texting, calling, how come I haven't heard from you? Well, Dad, I was at the party and I had class and I'm working again. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I was in my own feelings. They out there living life like I taught them to, bro. And I'm at home going,
So you're in your own feelings.
yeah, bro, how come you haven't called me? You don't love me anymore? So I had to get over myself and figure out I better go get my own life because they're doing exactly what I taught them to do, which is go live life.
Exactly.
And so,
exactly.
You have to figure out as a parent how to stay plugged in, but how to give them space to become their own person.
Right.
And I think sometimes parents might lose the knack for that. And then, don't forget you're still teaching your kids. My father's 87. I'm still learning from my father.
If you like what you hear and want to join us on this journey of making uncomfortable conversations comfortable, please subscribe to a Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe now to stay connected for more episodes that challenge, inspire, and lead the change.
And
as
so
rightfully
you can't,
so, right?
As rightfully so, right? So you want to stay plugged into your kids. You want to stay engaged in a manner which is respectful, not be overbearing. But again, I think we also need to make sure that we understand the kind of world that our kids live in. Remember when rap came out and our parents was like, this the death of music?
Right.
And now rap is in cereal commercials.
But matter of fact, they listen to it now.
yeah. Right. But I think we need to be cognizant of the negative impact social media is having on our kids and how much it's isolating them. And we have to fight that and come up with solutions to make sure that your kids are plugged into family, plugged into yourself, and you create the circle of trust where they still are coming to you, when they have negative thoughts, when they have trepidation, when they're irritated with a coworker or their own relationship. And so, trust is huge. And I think that that's a factor too, why sometimes kids don't come to parents or there's fractures in a relationship is there's a trust factor.
Absolutely, my friend. I totally agree. Final thoughts. What do you want to leave the audience, man? I mean, you gave a lot today. This was awesome. Final thoughts.
Well, again, the article was written so people would have perspective. If they're dealing with this, they're not alone. We wanted to make sure that we spoke to people who are struggling with this to give them some solutions on what they can do. But, my prayer for everybody out there is that they have and maintain a healthy relationship with their kids. If you don't, go seek therapy if you can. If you can bring in another adult, a loving cousin, a grandmother, a brother, or a sibling to interject, to create, a referee, if you will, do it. And if you think something is going on with your adult child, you need to start addressing it as fast as possible. Because remember, the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And so my advice is to love on them hard, stay in the moment. If you can continue to create, staycations, real vacations, opportunities for personal touch, do it. So that's my final word.
Buddy, I really appreciate it, and I thank you. You mind if I share? I want to share a story real quick
Absolutely.
about this because, again, your article, when I read it, it really touched me. And I'm pretty sure that people who are listening to or watching this episode of A Black Executive Perspective can relate to the story I'm about to say, right? So, and again, my son, his name was Randy. And him and we fell out and it wasn't anything with divorce. It was just, he wasn't doing the things that I worked hard for him to do and the way I wanted. I brought him up and raised him. And I had all these, to your point, plans of the future for him,
Right.
and this and that and all that. And he decided to go his own way. And, as a parent, sometimes you have to say, well, you know what? That's what you want to do. You want to live that way. You go do it, but you can't live that way in my house until you come back. The right way. Don't come back. I don't want to talk to you, right? So, that was my stance. And then one night, on a Friday night, around about 9:30, I got a phone call from this hospital in Colorado. And it said my son was dying from leukemia and he wasn't going to make it through the night.
Oh, my God.
Okay. Now, we didn't even know he had leukemia. He didn't even know. He had a sore throat. and it didn't get any better. And then he went to the doctor after about 30 days. They admitted him, right? And called me. I couldn't even, there was no flight to get there that night from here to Connecticut. I flew out the first flight the next morning. And by the time I landed, he passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, bro.
Okay.
I'm
And
so
think
sorry to hear
about the
that.
guilt when I walked into the hospital and I saw him laying on that bed and I cried like a baby. And you know what I was saying? I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry. Right. And nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody. And so
Nobody,
I
Tony.
don't matter, doesn't matter what your circumstances are. And I get it. You may be upset because mommy or daddy or somebody didn't do the right thing when they should have, and they were at fault, right? But you know what? Life is short. It's not promised to anyone. And the last thing you ever want, because I experienced this and I still carry this, is to not have a relationship with one of your family members, your own kid, or your
Right.
father, or your mother, or your sister, and be upset at them about something and then never see them again.
Right.
It ain't worth it.
It's
It's
not.
not,
It's not.
right? So thank you for allowing me to share in that story. And I hope it resonates because there's no argument, no disagreement that's worth not talking to your loved one ever again.
Wow. That is deep. I can't tell you how proud I am of you for sharing that. And I'm so sorry, bro. And I did not know that. You just shared that with me just now, but you're the reason I wrote the article, bro. And you sharing that is going to save someone else that pain of having to go through that. Hopefully, somebody sees this and makes a call today. And so I
That's
appreciate you sharing it, bro.
that is it, my brother, because it's not worth it. It's just not,
No.
right? Life is so short. So let's forgive, right? I'm glad you wrote this article, my brother. Let me give you a round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
All
Thank
right.
you.
That's for
No,
my
not the sound
man.
effects, Tony.
Right, you
Not the
love
sound
it,
effects. You
right?
got
That's
sound
for my
effects
brother.
now?
I got sound. Buddy, it's a new beat in the
Bro,
studio.
bro, I see
Right,
growth. I see growth.
I told you, right? We turned in some bottles that we've been
I see
seeing for
growth,
a
man.
while,
This is
right?
amazing.
We turned them
Okay.
in. We got
We
some
need a
leads
live
in the
audience now.
pockets,
We need
right?
a live
You
audience.
know what I'm saying? So now
Okay.
I can, I want to always thank my audience, my guests. They come on and bring it like you brought it today, my brother. So I
I
love you a
appreciate
lot.
it. I
You know
appreciate it. I
what
love
I'm
you too,
saying?
dog.
And you stay right there, okay?
All
Because
right.
we're
All
gonna,
right.
Brad Boland is gonna help us with our call to action. So I think it's now time for what?
Tony's Tidbit.
So the tidbit today, and obviously it's always about what our episode is. So the tidbit today is building bridges over troubled waters. Forgiveness in families teaches us that healing is not about erasing the past, but letting go of its hold on our lives. Okay. And Brad Boland, his article, please make sure you check it out. Surviving the Loss of a Living Child. He talks about that. We talked about that today. So it's important for whatever your circumstance. And I get it. I totally get it. Right? They were wrong. Totally get it. Right? Some point we got to forgive and we got to move on. Right? So please don't forget to check out the next Need to Know by Dr. Nasinga Burton, which appears on the Black Executive Perspective every Thursday. Dr. Burton brings on and dives into the timely, crucial topics that shape our community and world. You don't want to miss what's going on because, you know, what Brad Boland just got finished talking about in the social media world, we're liking and looking in 10 seconds here and that, and you're missing things that's going to affect your life, your community. So make sure you check out Need to Know by Dr. Nasinga Burton every week, every Thursday on a Black Executive Perspective podcast. So again, I hope you enjoy the episode with Brad Boling, Surviving the Loss of a Living Child. So now it's time for BEP's call to action called Less. Our goal, our platform, why we're here, it's about decreasing all forms of discrimination. So we use the acronym LESS, LESS. So Brad is going to kick us off. What does L stand for, Brad?
Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances.
Exactly, right? And then E stands for empathy, okay? Once you've learned and now you become more enlightened, you should be more empathetic to your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, because now you understand what they've been going through.
And then next is share your insights to enlighten others.
Exactly. And then the final S is stop. We want to stop discrimination as it walks into our path. So if Aunt Jenny says something at the Sunday dinner table that's inappropriate, you say, Aunt Jenny, we don't believe that. We don't talk that way. And you stop it immediately. So if everyone can incorporate less in their daily walk, and this is something that's in everyone's control, LESS, we'll have a more fair and understanding world. And more importantly, we'll all be able to see the change that we want to see, because less will become more. So again, you can continue to follow a Black Executive Perspective podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us on our social media accounts at TikTok, X, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at A Black Exec. For our fabulous guest, the president of Code M Magazine, Brad Boland, I'm Tony Tidbit. We really enjoyed talking to you about it today. We love you, and guess what? We're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.